Hello, and welcome back to your favorite solo true crime adventure with me, Madison. I said it in one of the other ones I recorded today, but I have no idea what order I'm going to release these in. Some of these are going to be harder to edit than others, so I don't quite know what the first one I'll be able to get done before my surgery is. But there's going to be not a lot of, banter at the beginning of these next couple weeks of episodes, and this might not even make sense because banter won't make sense because I don't know what order they're coming out in, and they're going to be slightly ahead, so I'm not quite sure what's going on in the world. So they're going to be a little short on the front end. And like I said, I may have already explained this in an episode that I put out before this one. I have no idea what I'm going to do. I'm just flying by the seat of my pants. I want to remind you to check out the website if you haven't, or remind you that you can. MadisonShelby.com if you want to see more pictures from the case. And if you would rather read the transcript or do both, whatever, the episode transcript is typed up for you, and I include more pictures than I can share on Instagram if you're interested in that. And you can suggest a case. I have a new form, so you just go to the form on the website, type in your suggestion, your name, hit send, and it goes right to my inbox. So that's the easiest way to do that now. I can't believe it took me so long to figure that out, but it is really great. I've gotten a couple through there, and it's so perfect because I can just add them right to the Google spreadsheet. It's amazing. And I guess I can just get started because I don't even know what day it is when you're listening to this. This is going to be kind of longer. I heavily debated splitting this into two parts. Heavily. I just couldn't find a spot to do it. So I'm just going to put it in one long part for you. I know some of you prefer longer episodes anyway, so this one is for you guys. I am doing the case of Dennis Rader, aka BTK, the serial killer. So Dennis Lynn Rader was born in Pittsburgh, Kansas, which I didn't know existed. We all know how I feel about that. On March 9th, 1945, to Dorothea and William Rader. He had 3 younger brothers. They ended up growing up in Wichita. Dennis would later say his parents were pretty busy, all the time, and basically alluding to being, borderline neglected and ignored, specifically by his mother. Dennis would later say he had sick fantasies starting when he was very young. He was very drawn to the idea of torturing trapped and helpless women. He also enjoyed hurting animals and seeing animals be hurt, which we all know was part of the McDonald triad, which are the 3 factors that are signs of future psychopathic behavior: harming animals, starting fires, bedwetting. Those are the 3. Which also apparently has its own name, zoo sadism, when you get sexual pleasure from animal cruelty, which is just disgusting. He would also spy on girl neighbors. He would dress up as a girl, and he would pleasure himself with ropes tied around his neck and arms. Just more of his passions and fantasies. This guy is very fucked up. This is this is just the beginning. He's a very fucked up individual. After graduating from Wichita Heights High School, Dennis attended Kansas Wesleyan University, and he received only mediocre grades and dropped out after 1 year. Dennis served in the United States Air Force from 1966 to 1970. On his discharge, he moved to Park City, which is a suburb of Wichita, where he worked in the meat department of an IGA supermarket where his mother was a bookkeeper. Dennis married Paula Dietz on May 22nd, 1971. They had 2 children, Carrie and Brian. He attended Butler County Community College in El Dorado, earning an associate's degree in electronics engineering technology in 1973. The next year, 1974, Dennis Rader would begin his serial killer spree. I don't know if spree is the right word. I don't think you can use serial killer and spree in the same thing because they are separate. But he would begin murdering people the year after he got his associate's degree. So I'm going to start with his first murder on January 15th, 1974. 4 members of the Otero family were murdered in Wichita, Kansas. The victims were Joseph Otero Sr., who was 38, Julia Maria Otero, who was 33, Joseph Otero II, who was 9, and Josephine Otero, who was 11. Their bodies were discovered by the family's 3 older children who had been at school at the time of the killings. So this was going on during the day, and I can't think of a more fucked up situation of who was finding these bodies. That makes me sick. So Dennis claimed that he first targeted the family 2 months before their murders when he spotted Julie leaving. Julia Maria is also referred to as Julie. Josephine is referred to as Josie, and Joseph is Joey. They're all the same. So he claimed he first targeted the family 2 months prior to their murders when he spotted Julie leaving to take her children to school and followed them. On the morning of January 15th, Dennis cut the phone lines and entered the Otero residence when Joey opened the back door for the family dog. So the doors opened because they let the dog out. Dennis came in. He points the gun at Mr. Otero, and he's just very thrown off. Dennis did not expect him to be there, he later said. He thought it was just going to be Mrs. Otero and the 2 younger children. So he tries to make up the story, telling Mr. Otero that he's a wanted man in California, like he needs their car, he's hungry, he wants food. He ordered all of them to lay on the living room floor, but the dog was barking so much that Dennis made Mr. Otero get up, move the dog outside. After he returned, he took all 4 Otero family members to a different bedroom and tied them all up. And then Dennis said they were complaining about the ropes, so he did loosen them a few times. And Mr. Otero had some damaged ribs from a car accident, so he was trying to be mindful of that. He even gave Mr. Otero something to prop his head up. And they were all talking to Dennis, telling him things like they didn't have much for him, but they'll give him whatever he wants. Like, you don't have to do this. Like, you can really take whatever you want. We really don't care. And at this point, Dennis starts to realize that he's not wearing any type of mask, so he can very easily be ID'd. So he made the decision to strangle all of them. However, he had never strangled anyone before, so this ends up being almost a disaster for him. So he starts with Mr. Otero, put a bag over his head and tightened it with cords. He then moves on and does the same thing to Mrs. Otero and the children, but he's not doing it right, and everyone just keeps waking up. Like, everyone is passing out, he thinks they're dead, he moves on, they wake up again. Like, it's like if it wasn't so fucked up, it would be like a skit, like clockwork, people up and down. So Mrs. Otero wakes up and is yelling at him to save her son. And Dennis is just flustered, for lack of better words, right now. He has no idea what's going on. So he redoes Mr. Otero. He strangles him, puts a bag over his head. He then strangled Mrs. Otero to death with a rope. So now both parents are finally deceased. So Joey wakes up and tears a hole in his back. So, like, airflow is getting in now. So Dennis takes Joey away from everyone else, puts him in a separate bedroom, covers his face with a t-shirt, and then ties a new bag around his head so he can't rip a hole in it. So he does end up suffocating to death from that. When he returns to the room, Josephine had woken up again. He then walked her down to the basement and hung her from a pipe and masturbated as she was dying. There was semen found near her clothed body at the crime scene. I did read that she wasn't clothed a few places, and a few places says she was clothed. I'm not sure if you hear it a different way. I'm not dying on the hill that she was clothed, but that's just what I had read it both ways. But in the book, Confessions of a Serial Killer, The Untold Story of Dennis Rader, the BTK Killer by Dr. Kathryn Ramsland. The book was written with Dennis, by the way, and not just about him. So she allowed him to almost write an autobiography so that people could truly see the mind of a serial killer directly. Anyway, in this book, we learn that his penis is named Sparky. These are his words. When Sparky is excited to the point of erection, usually due to the idea of or images of women in bondage, asphyxiating, hanging in a barn, or drowning, and sometimes the real thing, he calls it Sparky Big Time. It's impossible to know something about this case and not know that. I almost didn't put it in here because I think it's so stupid. But I didn't want you to think that I wasn't doing my research, or that who knows what of this is right, because I didn't even bring up Sparky Big Time. I brought it up. I don't care about it. I know other podcasts really harp on this. I don't want to do that. This will be like the first and last time I say this. And also, another thing about this case that really bothers me when I have heard it is this man is not smart. This man is kind of stupid, which you will see time and time again. He's like an idiot. I don't harp on that either, because he has several victims. And to me, if you are nonstop harping about what an idiot and how stupid and how dumb this guy is. I feel like you are almost like, I don't know how to word it, but you're almost making it seem like the victims are dumb. Like, how could you get murdered by someone this fucking stupid? So I just don't do that. I think he is dumb, but I'm not going to make a whole fucking thing about it. Two things. Very dumb. I'm not going to talk about Sparky Big Time anymore. So that is that. So after the Otero murders, he decided to clean up after himself. He said, I think it's called the right hand rule. You go from room to room. He said, I picked up everything. I think I took Mr. Otero's watch. I took a radio. I had forgotten about that, but apparently I took a radio. When asked why he took all this stuff, he was like, honestly, I don't know. He then took their car, drove it to Dillon's, which is a grocery store, and then walked home. On April 4th, 1974, so just a few months later, he found his next victim in 21-year-old Kathryn Bright. So he broke into her house while she wasn't home and waited in a bedroom. Her and her 19-year-old brother Kevin came home. As they passed the bedroom, they heard a man say, "Hold it right there." And they looked over and he had a gun. Dennis told them essentially the same story as he told the Oteros, that he was a wanted man. He needed to take their car. He was, again, thrown off because he was not expecting Kevin to be there. He was only expecting Kathryn to be there. So he had them both tied up, put them in different bedrooms. He then started with Kevin first. So Dennis said he started to strangle him, but Kevin broke out of his binds, and then they got into a fight. There is a discrepancy in testimony. According to Dennis, he pulled out his gun, fired 2 rounds hitting Kevin, and then Kevin fell over. According to Kevin, when Dennis grabbed the gun, Kevin lunged and took the gun from Dennis and attempted to shoot Dennis twice. This does happen. Kevin does almost shoot Dennis, but it's unclear if it happened now or later. So either way, now Kevin does get shot and then goes down. Dennis leaves him and then goes back to Kathryn, who was also busted out of her binds. And there was some questioning of Dennis's tools during the investigation and whether or not he brought his own binds or used some found at the houses he was at. And he said he was pretty sure he brought his own for the Otero family and that he must have used stuff at the Bright house because if he had brought his own stuff, there was no way they would have gotten out of them. So he's saying he wasn't like working with the best materials at the Bright murder. He must have found stuff at their house to try and it just like wasn't working. So Dennis and Kathryn are fighting because she's no longer tied up. And while he is attempting to strangle Kathryn, he hears movement from upstairs. So he thinks Kathryn's down for the count. Strangled her. Done. He goes back upstairs to try and finish off Kevin. So he tried to strangle Kevin again. And then Kevin jumps up because Kevin wasn't like actually subdued at this time. And they get into yet another fight when Dennis then just shoots Kevin in the head. And Kevin said he fell over and just played dead. He just toppled over. So Dennis is thinking Kevin is absolutely dead. So he went to check on Kathryn, and she was still alive. So he's trying to strangle her again. So as he's strangling her, he hears more movement, and he just decides to stab Kathryn 3 times in the ribs and be done with it. Like, the situation has gotten out of control for him. He stabs her, and he notices the front door is open, and Kevin is gone. And at this point, he can see Kevin running down the street. And Dennis, at this point, thinks he's fucked. He's like, I knew the police were coming for me at this point, and it's all over. So he cleans up as fast as he can. He takes their car keys and attempts to drive away, but he has the wrong keys. And he can see Kevin approaching people for help. And remember, Kevin was shot in the head. So he looks alarming. So he can see Kevin finally, like, approaching people at this time when he's, like, in the car with the wrong keys trying to get away. So he abandons this entire idea and he just takes off at foot. And he just takes off on foot at this point to go back to his own car at Wichita State University. Dennis then takes a break for about 3 years, which is common with serial killers. You can usually see years of inactivity. But before he did that, in October of 1974, he wrote a letter detailing the Otero murders and put it inside a public library book. That same month, the Wichita Eagle newspaper received a call from a man telling them that in a mechanical engineering textbook from the main branch of the Wichita Public Library was a letter from whoever had murdered the Otero family. As far as I know, the letter has never been released, but there are some excerpts from the crime library that I will read. All grammar and spelling issues are Dennis's doing, by the way. Excerpt 1. was, I write this letter to you for the sake of the taxpayer as well as your time. Those 3 dude you have in custody are just talking to get publicity for the Otero murders. They know nothing at all. I did it by myself and with no one's help. There has been no talk either. Let's put this straight. So they had arrested some people for the Otero murders, which we obviously know couldn't have been anyone because Dennis did it. And he wrote a letter saying, like, those are not your men. Dennis's thing also, he's like a narcissist, so he doesn't like want anyone else taking credit for like the things that he had done. So he was not having that. The second excerpt said, I'm sorry this happened to society. They are the ones who suffer the most. It's hard to control myself. You probably call me psychotic with sexual perversion hang up. When this monster entered my brain, I will never know. But it here to stay. How does one cure himself? If you ask for help that you have killed 4 people, they will laugh or hit the panic button and call the cops. I can't stop it, so the monster goes on and hurt me as well as society. Society can be thankful that there are ways for people like me to relieve myself at time by daydreams of some victims being tortured, being mine. It is a big, complicated game, my friend, of the monster playing, putting victims' number down, following them, checking up on them, waiting in the dark, waiting. The pressure's great. Sometimes he run the game to his liking. Maybe you can stop him. I can't. He has already chosen his next victim or victims. I don't know who they are yet. The next day after I read the paper, I will know, but it's too late. Good luck hunting. Yours truly, Guilty. The letter was not signed, but there was a P.S. at the bottom. He said, P.S. Since sex criminals do not change their M.O. or by nature cannot do so, I will not change mine. The code words for me will be bind them, torture them, kill them. BTK. You see, he added again. They will be on the next victim. So he's really trying very hard, and he will do it again later to give himself a nickname. So he's already like trying to plant the seed of like, I'm gonna BTK them, hoping that they will call him BTK. So after this 3-year gap, he chose his next victim on March 17th, 1977. It was 25-year-old Shirley Ruth Vian. Dennis said that he had been sitting at Dylan's and actually intended to have a different victim, but he had tried to get in the house and couldn't, like the door was locked. So while he was sitting at Dylan's, he saw a little boy leave the store and walk inside one of the houses. He first tried knocking on a few more houses in the neighborhood, but when nobody answered, he went to the house where he saw the boy go. When they answered the door, he said he was a private detective and needed them to look at some photos, and then made his way inside and pulled a gun on them. There are like several children in here, and Shirley. That's it. When I say them, I mean like a bunch of kids. He told Shirley what was going on, that he had sexual fantasies and that he was going to need to tie her up and probably tie the kids up too, and asked her to cooperate. He said she was extremely nervous and smoked a cigarette, and then when they were on the back porch, told her that he had done this before. So they're just like in the backyard. She thinks like this man's going to tie her up and do terrible things to her, but she's going to live. She's smoking a cigarette out there, her eyes probably twitching, and he's like telling her about how he has done this before. So he tried to tie the kids up in the bedroom, and they were just screaming. So he made Shirley help him put them in the bathroom. He said he tried to make them as comfortable as possible, putting blankets and toys in there. He then tied the door shut and shoved a bed in front of it. At one point, her 5-year-old son, who had opened the door downstairs to let him in, said he shouted to the man that he was going to untie the rope from underneath the sink. And then he said that Dennis told him that if he did that, he would blow my bleeping head off. I'm assuming it's fucking. They bleeped out the whatever was in there. He then proceeded to tie Kathryn up. As he was tying her legs to the bed, she got sick and threw up. And he had even said that she was still in her robe when he got there, and she looked sick when he got there, like she had been ill. So he got her a glass of water, to be nice. He then took the rope that he was using to tie her legs and brought it up to her neck and strangled her with it and put a plastic bag over her head for good measure. Her son said he could see out of the top of the bathroom door, and he could see his mother stripped, lying face down on the bed with a bag over her head. Dennis did intend to kill the children, but the children were screaming and banging on the door, and then the phone rang, and he remembered someone in the house saying that the neighbor was coming to check on Shirley because she was sick. So he couldn't risk it. He got his shit and rolled out of there and grabbed his car from Dylan's. Dennis had been stalking 25-year-old Nancy Fox for some time before he acted on her. He would later say, First, she was spotted. I did a little homework. I dropped by once to check her mailbox, to see what her name was. I found out where she worked, stopped by there once, sized her up. The more I knew about a person, the more comfortable I felt. So he did that a couple times, and then he picked a night to try it, and it just happened to work out. So he knew nobody would be home. So on December 8th, 1977, he cut her phone line and then waited in her kitchen for her to get home from work. Dennis said that when she came home, he said, I confronted her, told her I had a problem, a sexual problem, and that I would tie her up and have sex with her. She was a little upset, and we talked a while, and she smoked a cigarette. While we smoked a cigarette, I went through her purse identifying some stuff, and she finally said, well, let's get this over with so I can call the police. So I said, okay, and she said, can I go to the bathroom? And Dennis said, yes. She then went to the bathroom, and Dennis told her that when she came out to make sure she was undressed, he said when she came out, I handcuffed her, had her lie on the bed, and tied her feet. I was also undressed to a certain degree, and then I got on top of her. I reached over, took either her feet were tied or not tied, but I think I had a belt. Anyway, I took the belt and strangled her at that time. As he was strangling her, he leaned over and told her that he was BTK and he had done terrible things like this before. So, yes, he is in fact using the nickname that he gave himself during these murders. Dennis said after I strangled her with the belt, I took the belt off and retied that with pantyhose real tight, removed the handcuffs and tied those with pantyhose. He thinks he may have retied her feet, but they were probably already tied, and then at that time, I masturbated. Fox's murder would be described by Rader as what he called the perfect hit. He said, although she gave me a lot of verbal static, she cooperated, she didn't fight me, I had complete control of her. That's why it was one of the more enjoyable kills, as I call them. Afterwards, he took some of her nicer clothes and left. The following day, on his way to work for the ADT Alarm Company, yes, he works for a home alarm company, and I think it was him that, it's either him or the Golden State Killer, I can't remember, one of these. He was working for an alarm system, and he was like installing alarms on homes that were talking about how he was the reason they were installing alarms on their homes. So he was at work, he called the local police department and said, yes, you will find a homicide at 843 South Pershing, Nancy Fox. That is correct, and then left the receiver dangling. The police rushed to the house at 843 South Pershing and found Nancy's body strangled to death. The police tried to replay the recording of his voice many times, but never found a match. So that was 1977. He takes another break until 1985, but before that, he sends a couple more letters. In January of 1978, a poem from BTK was sent to the Wichita Eagle, which was a parody on a nursery rhyme related to the murder of Shirley Vian Relford. And then there was another, there was another poem, if you call it that he included sort of about Nancy, and it said, oh, death to Nancy. What is this that I can see? Cold icy hands taking hold of me. For death has come, you all can see. Hell has opened its gates to trick me. Oh, death, can't you spare me for over another year? I'll stuff your jaws till you can't talk. I'll bind your legs till you can't walk. I'll tie your hands till you can't make a stand. And finally, I'll close your eyes so you can't see. I'll bring sexual death unto you for me. BTK. And then in February of 1978, he sends another letter, so a month later, because he's pissed off that, he hasn't made national news yet. He's not all over the place. This is very, I don't want to say under wraps because they're not doing it on purpose, but it's not reaching the levels that he wants them to reach. Because he wants to be Ted Bundy. He wants to be these prolific serial killers. He wants that attention. So in February, a month later, he sends another letter. He suggested many possible names for himself, including BTK. He demanded media attention in the second letter, saying, how many more do I have to kill before I get a name in the paper or some national attention? How about some name for me? It's time. 7 down and many more to go. I like the following: the BTK Strangler, the Wichita Hangman, the Garrote Phantom, and the Asphyxiator. So a garrote, I don't know how to pronounce it because it has Spanish origins, but... So anyway, that is a method of capital punishment of Spanish origin in which an iron collar is tightened around a condemned person's neck until death occurs by strangulation or by injury to the spinal column at the base of the brain. It's a collar-like instrument used for a method of execution. That's what that means. It has a lot of other definitions, but that has to be the one he's referencing. In the letter, he claimed to be driven to kill by factor X, which he characterized as a supernatural element that also motivated Jack the Ripper, the son of Sam, and the Hillside Strangler. You know that TikTok or meme? I can't remember where it came from, but it was like maybe we would have less serial killers if we stopped giving them cool-ass names like the Night Stalker and like started calling them like the Small Wiener Loser instead. I feel like that's what Dennis is getting at. He's like, how am I not on the news, and how have I not gotten like a moniker yet? So he just made up his own, had people call him that. Other serial killers, like the Golden State Killer and the Night Stalker, those were all monikers given to them by the media. Dennis's came from himself, just so that is clear. There is nothing less cool than giving yourself a nickname. I will stand by that. I have always felt like that. You can't give yourself a nickname. It's just something that sort of happens that other people give to you. So, yeah. Usually when you hear about serial killers referenced by like a fake name, it's because that's like sort of what the media had invented and went along with. That's not the case with Dennis Rader. He made up BTK and then he forced people to call him that. In 1979, Dennis had intended to kill 63-year-old Anna Williams. He waited in her house for her to get home from visiting with her friend. He had apparently been obsessed with her and was livid that she didn't come home that night. He got too impatient and left, and then sent a letter to her and the news station a few weeks later. I'm sorry if I'm making a lot of mouth noises. I'm trying to drink my coffee at the same time, which I don't like to do. But it is Friday morning. So I'm just having a little peppermint coffee, and I feel like it's messing all my shit up. So I do apologize for that. So he tries to kill Anna Williams, and she's like out with her friends and doesn't come home, which good for her. A 63-year-old girl having a great time with her friends and spending the night. You love to see it. So he sent a letter to her in the news station a few weeks later. He included a poem titled, "Oh, Anna, why didn't you come? Oh, Anna, why didn't you appear? 'Twas perfect plan of deviant pleasure, so bold on that spring night. My inner feeling hot with propension of the new awakening season. Worn, wet with inner fear and rapture, my pleasure of entanglement like new vines at night. Oh, Anna, why didn't you appear? Drop of fear, fresh spring rain would roll down from your nakedness to scent to lofty fever that burns within." I'm reading this word for word, by the way, so if you think this doesn't make any sense, you're probably correct. In that small world of longing, fear, rapture, and desperation, the game we play fall on devil ears. Fantasies spring forth, mounts to storm fury, then winter clam at the end. Oh, Anna, why didn't you appear? Alone, now in another time span, I lie with sweet and rapture garments across most private thought. Bed of spring moist grass, clean before the sun, enslaved with control, warm wind scenting the air, sunlight sparkle tears in eyes so deep and clear. Alone again, I trot and pass memory of mirrors and ponder why for number 8 was not. Oh, Anna, why didn't you appear? And he signed it BTK 1979. 53-year-old Marion Hedge was found dead on May 5th, 1985. He called this one Project Cookie for some reason, and he was extra proud of this kill because she lived right down the street from him, so they were essentially neighbors. And he said that's usually not good for serial killers to kill in their own habitat, but if he could pull it off, it would be a biggie. So on April 27th, 1985, according to BTK Weekly, Dennis was in the middle of a Boy Scout meeting when he stated that he had a headache and needed to leave to get medicine. He left and walked to his car that was near a bowling alley. He went inside, bought a beer. He swished the beer in his mouth and then spit it out, purposely spilling some on his clothing, giving onlookers the illusion that he had been drinking. He called a cab, pretending to be drunk, and told the driver to take him to Park City. He instead went to Marion Hedge's house. He cut the phone line and then waited inside her house for her to get home. When she got home, she had a male friend with her, so he had to wait until he left around 1 a.m. When she went to sleep, he jumped on her and strangled Marion to death in her home and then took her body to a church to take explicit photographs of her in bondage positions and then dumped her body in a ditch where it was then found. Dennis told investigators he took the body to the church to have his way with her to fulfill his sexual fantasies. He had left black plastic sheets and other material at the church in anticipation of the killing. The investigator said, "Dennis told me that she was going to the church, alive or dead, either way." Also, 2 things about this case. Dennis Rader is a troop leader for his son's Boy Scout troop or whatever. So he's at these Boy Scout meetings, and he is like heavily involved with this church that he used to do what he did to Marion. He's like president of some fucking bullshit. It comes up way later, but just to put that in your head, like, don't forget he's living a whole life while he's doing this. He has 2 children, a wife, a job. He's a troop leader. He is very involved at his church, and this is also what he's doing. Which is why there is a lot of, and I get into it in just a few minutes here, there's a lot of years of inactivity for serial killers because they usually are living normal lives otherwise. On September 16th, 1986, Dennis strangled 28-year-old Vicki Lynn Wegerle to death with a nylon stocking at her home in Wichita. He would walk by her house during the day and listen to her play the piano. He thought this murder out carefully, calling it his PJ project. So on September 16th, he went to her house and knocked on her door saying he was a telephone repairman, and she let him inside. According to Surviving BTK, the website, he cut the line and told her that he was going to tie her up. At gunpoint, he forced her into the bedroom and tried to tie her up, but she gave him a fight, causing cuts and scratches on Dennis. He got a rope and stopped her fighting by choking her to death. After that, he took photos of the body in different positions, then left, stealing her car. Then, as Dennis is driving away, Vicki's husband is driving towards their house and sees the car driving away, which is her car. When he got home, he discovered his wife dead in their home. Another fucked up part is, like, he was actually looked into as a suspect for a while in this murder, because that is obviously the first place you look, but, like, how fucked up. Because I have no idea, he's not, like, writing letters about all these murders, so some of these he's, like, not taking credit for, so they have, like, no idea what's going on. Dennis Rader's final victim was 62-year-old Dolores Arlene, they call her D. Davis. She was found dead on February 1st, 1991. So on January 19th, 1991, he came up with an excuse to slip away from one of the Boy Scout meetings. He drove his car to his parents' house to change out of his scout uniform and into his, quote, hit clothes. He then parked his car and walked to Davis's house. He waited until she went to bed and then smashed her back sliding door with a brick and went inside. He then told Davis the same line he tells everyone else, that he was a vagrant, he was wanted in California, he needed money in a car, and that he was going to tie her up. According to Surviving BTK, he tied her up in the bedroom and strangled her to death. He then took the body outside and put her in the trunk of her own car. He drove to a lake near Park City and hid the body and evidence under some trees. He drove back to her house, wiped it down for fingerprints, and then left to go back to the church. He went back to where he hid the body, put it in his trunk, and dumped the body under a bridge in Sedgwick County. Dennis then went somewhere to change back into his scout uniform and returned back to the camp. The following night, still at the Boy Scout camp, he went back to where he left the body and took photographs of it. So he went several years between groups of murders, and he would have 14 years from his last murder until he got caught. So he gets away with this for a very long time. So during this downtime, like between murders and after his last murder, he would find different ways to fulfill his fantasy. He would take clothing from his victims after he murdered them, and during his dormant years, he would dress up dolls in his victims' clothing, cut out naked pictures of girls in magazines, and relive his killings. And he said to a criminologist who was working with Dennis to write a book about serial killers, he told him that the public should feel lucky he was able to fulfill his autoerotic fantasies this way. Otherwise, there would have been a lot more murders. In the book Confessions of a Serial Killer, The Untold Story of Dennis Rader, the BTK Killer, like I said earlier, by Dr. Kathleen Ramsland, he explained these as, he called them motel parties. He'll go to a motel and dress up and read his slick ads, which is what he called his homemade porn, where he would cut out images of women from magazines and draw gags and bindings on them. He would then dress himself up like his victims and bind himself to get pleasure. He said he did this at motels because he didn't want to subject his wife to his fantasies. Something tells me she would not have been down for that. Another thing that allowed him to delay his killings was some of the power he got from working. Harvey is looking at the volume thing going up and down on the monitor. What is this thing called? Soundboard, I don't know. And she wants to attack it. Okay. So, like I said, he had a little bit of power at his job, which he loved. First, his job at a security company, installing alarm systems, and later as a compliance officer in Park City, Kansas. When he was a compliance officer, he got to have a badge, and that made him feel very important, but he was, like, very extra about it. In an article, someone who dealt with him said his job was to enforce city codes, animal laws, trash regulations, property maintenance, things like that, and he just took it way too far. James Reno was a neighbor who, like, dealt with him all the time about shit like this. Said he was mean-spirited and a coward. He said he called into City Hall to complain about Dennis several times and was always told, we'll look into it. James Reno did say, like, he never really messed with him that much. He always picked on the single woman on the street who he could bully. Like, he very much was not about to try any bullshit with a man, but he was, like, very into bossing these single women around. 2 neighbors said that he was particularly hard on a woman dying of cancer who had arthritis. He repeatedly fined her for not keeping her lawn cut properly. That person's son said he knew my mother couldn't get around and he would come down the street and measure her grass, and if it was a little bit over, he'd write her a warning or a citation. James Reno said again what little power he had, he abused. He was a very petty man. It's kind of curious that dogs that were in backyards suddenly came loose when he was around, and then there he was to write the ticket. So alleging he's, like, letting people's dogs out and then writing tickets for having their dogs out. Margaret Farmer said her daughter's garage burned down a few years ago, and within a day, Dennis was demanding that she pay to have the debris hauled off. She said, I don't know anyone on the street that didn't despise him. He acted like his word was the only law. Everyone else was supposed to do exactly as he said when he said it. It is also alleged that although he wasn't killing during this time, he never stopped planning his kills. When talking to the criminologist writing a book, he told her he still had a list of, like, 55 people to kill. And he gave her that list, and she said they were detailed lists with names of the projects, dates, locations, circumstances, things that would have happened to people had he had the full amount of time that he needed and they were home. It's not like he was inactive during those periods of time. It's that he didn't have all the right circumstances to go forward with something. Another thing that kept him dormant was that he was living a full-on normal life outside of this. Remember, nobody ever suspected Dennis. He was a member of the Christ Lutheran Church in Wichita and had been elected president of the church council. He was also, as we know, a Cub Scout troop leader. He had several jobs. He was still married. He had 2 children, which he raised. It's not like he was an absent father. He was very involved in their lives. So that's why there were so many periods of inactivity. He was busy and he found other ways to, like, pleasure himself, I guess. So, like I said, years passed, there's no killings, there's no correspondence from him to the news stations, because remember, he was doing that quite a lot. So people either thought he must have moved or he died, because no bodies have turned up and he hasn't, like, written any weird-ass fucking letters to the Wichita Eagle in years. So, a domino effect of things lead him to accidentally giving himself up. Robert Beatty, a lawyer in Wichita, couldn't believe the amount of people who had not heard about the serial killer in Wichita. So he decided to start writing a book about it. And then in 2004, on the 30th anniversary of the Otero family murder, the Wichita Eagle ran an article about the case, which was about the same time that the book about the BTK killer was announced. So these things are happening at the same time. So I'm not sure if he was angry about the book being written about him, or if he sort of loved the attention he was getting again in the media about, like, the anniversary of the Otero murders in the book and stuff. But he wrote a letter to the Wichita Eagle right after that article came out on March 17th, 2004. The return address was from Bill Thomas Kilman. The envelope had 3 photocopy pictures of the ones he took of Vicki Wegerle and her driver's license, and then signed it with the same signature that had been used in the previous letters. Also, at this point, they hadn't linked Vicki's murder with BTK, like I said. Some of these weren't immediately linked to him. So they send the letter to the FBI, and it sort of reopens this cold case, and more interest in the case emerges in the media at this point. A second letter came to KAKE-TV in May of 2004, and it consisted of a lengthy word puzzle. The FBI was able to determine that the letter came from BTK, but had no idea what the puzzle was supposed to be, and nothing ever came of that. It's not like the Zodiac killer type of situation where it was like this decodable message. They had no idea what the fuck was going on there. Then, on June 9th, 2004, he left a package taped to a sign in the middle of the city which had a gruesome description of the Otero murders and a sketch of a dead body hanging by a rope. He titled the sketch, "The Sexual Thrill is My Bill." Also enclosed was a chapter list for a proposed book titled The BTK Story, which mimicked a story written in 1999 by court TV crime writer David Lohr. So he included these chapters: The BTK Story, A Serial Killer is Born, Dawn, Fetish, Fantasy World, The Search Begins, Haunts, PJs, Mo ID Ruse, Hits, Treasured Memories, Final Curtain Call, Dusk, Will There Be More? On June 17th, 2004, there was another package labeled BTK that was found at the Wichita Public Library. There are varying reports of what was in the package. Some websites say it was the same letter he wrote in 1974 about the Otero murder. Some websites say it was a letter about how he was going to kill again. Another website has it being discovered at the library in July, and the letter saying, "I have spotted a female that I think lives alone and is or a spotted latchkey kid. Just got to work out the details. I'm much older now and have to condition myself carefully. Also, my thinking process is not as sharp as it used to be. I think fall or winter would be just right for the hit. Gotta do it this year or next. Time is running out for me." Which, that would add up with the June letter about killing again. But again, this one seems all over the place. I'm not quite sure what actually was in this June 17, 2004 letter. It's like heavily disputed in all facets. So, on October 22nd, 2004, a UPS driver found a package from BTK. There was a collage of children with bindings drawn across their bodies and faces inside the manila envelope. It also contained an autobiography that listed false details about BTK. For example, the year he was born, the area he lived in, things like that. He's doing to intentionally mislead the police officers. In December of 2004, Wichita police received another package from BTK. This time, the package was found in Wichita's Murdoch Park. It had the driver's license of Nancy Fox, which was noted as stolen from the crime scene, as well as a doll that was symbolically bound at the hands and feet and had a plastic bag tied over its head. So he continued to do this into early 2005. He had taken a cereal box that he wrote bomb on and left on a Home Depot truck that was actually thrown away, and they didn't know it existed until he wrote another letter asking them about it, like, "Hey, why didn't you say anything about the bomb I left?" So they looked into that, and surveillance tape of the parking lot from that day revealed a distant figure driving a black Jeep Cherokee, leaving the box in the Home Depot pickup truck. Another cereal box was discovered with a doll inside that was bound and attached to a pipe intended to look like Josephine Otero. He sent more tokens from his victims, like he was sending back the things that he stole to prove like that he was tied to them. This all goes on until February of 2005. So, remember when I said that Dennis Rader is an absolute idiot? In this correspondence in February of 2005, he asked the police if a floppy disk could be traced or not. So the police write back in the Wichita Eagle, they put out an article responding to him, and they're like, no, definitely not. Absolutely cannot trace anything on a floppy disk. And if you're not aware what a floppy disk is, the USBs and the cloud didn't always exist. So floppy disks are these squares you put into your computer to load shit on, very flat, like the size of a CD, but square. And that used to be how you would get shit off of your computer, onto other computers. So anyway, they're like, yeah, no, we totally can't do that. Send on your floppy disk, Mr. Bind, Torture, Kill. Psych. On February 16th, 2005, Dennis Rader sent a purple 1.44 megabyte Memorex floppy disk to Fox affiliate KSAS-TV in Wichita. Also enclosed were a letter, a gold-colored necklace with a large medallion, and a photocopy of the cover of Rules of Prey, a 1989 novel by John Sanford about a serial killer. So, unbeknownst to Dennis, you absolutely can trace shit on a floppy disk. So, on that floppy disk, he had deleted a file that police were able to retrieve off the floppy disk still, and it was accessed by a man named Dennis at the Lutheran Church. One quick little investigation led them to Dennis Rader, who was president of the church council. So they looked up Dennis Rader, drove past his house, and in the driveway of his home was a black Jeep Wrangler, the same car seen dropping off a cereal box at Home Depot. So that wasn't enough to arrest him. They needed more. And they did something shady to get it. So bear with me here, because this is very fucked up. They were able to, without permission, anyone's permission, and just a court order, access Dennis Rader's daughter's Pap smear DNA and use it as a reference to the DNA left at the crime scene of BTK victims, and it was a perfect match. This was obviously very controversial at the time. It was an obvious invasion of privacy. I'm not sure, and I hope not, that you could get away with this today. And it was very conflicting because she essentially gave up her father without knowing that's what she did, because she had, like, it was from her school. They knew she went to that school. They figured she probably had used, like, the school's medical center, so they went there to get any type of DNA from her file that they could, which I think I link a very long article about this situation. It's like pages long about how this was allowed to happen and why it shouldn't have happened, things like that. It's very crazy. I can't believe that's how they caught this man. Either way, it didn't matter back then, and that was enough evidence to arrest Dennis Rader. He was arrested while driving near his home in Park City shortly after noon on February 25th, 2005. An officer asked Mr. Rader, "Do you know why you're going downtown?" And he replied, "I have a suspicion why." He didn't put up a fight. He didn't pretend not to know what was going on. Nothing. Like, he sort of immediately accepted that he was getting arrested. On February 28th, 2005, Dennis Rader was charged with 10 counts of first-degree murder. On March 1st, his bail was set at $10 million, and a public defender was appointed to represent him. Although I think he said he wanted to represent himself because Ted Bundy did, and this man is, like, as we know, obsessed with the serial killers that had come before him. After he was arrested, Michael Clark, his pastor, sort of came to his defense. He said he visited him in prison and that man was not a murderer. He said, "Let me make it very clear that I'm not challenging law enforcement. It's very possible that he, in fact, is a murderer. If that's a fact, we'll accept it and move on. All I am saying is I don't know the man they call BTK. I know Dennis Rader. I could ask him to do anything at this church. He would light the candles, work the sound system. He would usher." He said, "I told Dennis that I will not abandon him. I told him I will stand by his side as long as he wants me to. And people just don't want to hear that right now. We are no different than Dennis in our journey in life. Regardless of who we are all sinners and we will all be judged." Okay, right. We are all like Dennis Rader. Whatever, dude. He also reported that Dennis seemed to be holding up pretty well considering the circumstances. Another man from his church said the arrest was beyond comprehension for me. None of us will ever be the same again. I've thought back and asked myself, is there something he did, some word, some deed that could shed light? I couldn't find one thing. We prayed here for the capture of BTK and we didn't know he was among us. Another man, Bob, who knew Dennis for 35 years through the church, said, "Every time I come up to the church to do stuff, wash windows, fall cleaning, Dennis was there. I mean, how do you judge relations in your life after this? How do you deal with everybody?" Which is true. Apparently you don't know your friends as well as you think you do. On April 19th, 2005, Dennis waived his right to a preliminary hearing, basically acknowledging that's, like, just not necessary. There's quite enough evidence for a trial that doesn't need to be debated. During the hearing, which lasted only a few minutes, Dennis Rader answered yes, sir, to questions from Sedgwick County District Gregory Waller about whether he understood his rights. His attorney, Steve Osborne, said afterward that considering the low burden of proof, we didn't think there would be anything new that could come out anyway, so we didn't think there was much to be gained by having a preliminary hearing. Prosecutors had hoped for a preliminary hearing over several days so that they could start laying out the evidence against him. The court had sealed almost every order and motion filed in the case, so almost nothing he has done in detail has been revealed to the public yet. So the prosecution wanted his crimes to start being laid out to the public now, and now they don't get the chance to do that because there is no preliminary hearing, so it's still sealed. On May 3rd, 2005, Dennis Rader entered a plea of not guilty via the judge, so he stood there in the courtroom like a weird statue and had the judge enter the plea for him. The trial date was set for June 27th, 2005. So everyone expected the trial to be pushed back because they're always pushed back. So nobody expected the trial to take place that day. And they were right. It did not take place that day. But that's because the morning of June 27th, Dennis Rader pled guilty to 10 counts of first-degree murder. He told District Judge Gregory Waller that he understood the charges against him and that he was waiving his right to a jury trial. Dennis said, "The defense worked with me real well. We went over it. I feel like I'm pretty happy with them." The judge asked if he was pleading because he was guilty, and Dennis said, "Yes, sir." He then described to the court what he did, which is all of those descriptions that I read to you when I went over the crimes. That is what he described to the court. He gave very detailed confessions of the 10 murders. He was suspected of several other murders, but these are the only ones he was charged with and the only ones he ever confessed to. On August 12th, 2005, he did an interview with NBC in which he says, "I had what they call torture chambers, and to relieve your sexual fantasies, you have to go to the kill. I don't think it was actually the person I was after. I think it was the dream. I know that's not really nice to say about a person, but they were basically an object. They were just an object. That's all they were. On August 19th, 2005, Dennis Rader was sentenced to 10 consecutive life sentences, a minimum of 175 years. The death penalty was off the table because at the time of the murders, Kansas did not have the death penalty. They reintroduced the death penalty in 1994, and he wasn't convicted of any murders after that date. The sentencing hearing took 2 days, in which the family of victims and Dennis Rader were allowed to speak. Nancy Fox's sister, Beverly Plapp, testified, "Nancy's death is like a deep wound that will never, ever heal. As far as I'm concerned, Dennis Rader does not deserve to live. I want him to suffer as much as he made his victims suffer. This man needs to be thrown in a deep, dark hole and left to rot. He should never, ever see the light of day." Kevin Bright, the brother of Kathryn, who he himself was a victim of BTK, said, "No remorse, no compassion. He had no mercy. I think that's what he ought to receive." One of the surviving Otero siblings said, "My mother, against your gun, you are such a coward," who refused to address Rader as BTK because she said it would only dignify him. She said, "Rader is an appropriate name for you, as in one who invades a surprise attack. That is nothing to be proud of." During the hearing, prosecutors described more details of the Davis murder. They explained after Davis was dead, Dennis tossed her body under a bridge where it was decomposed and apparently was fed on by animals. Dennis then returned later to take Polaroid photographs of her wearing a feminine mask that Dennis himself had worn for his own bondage fantasies. Prosecutors showed various photographs of Dennis that he took of himself, hanging from a tree, laying in a grave, tied to a chair while wearing the mask of a woman's face, a blonde wig, bound and wearing a dress that he had taken from Davis's home, which will be on the website. I'm looking at it right now because I put it in my notes, and it is disturbing as fuck. So, remember, that is something that he did during his dormant years, though. He would wear clothes and masks and wigs to look like the victims and take pictures of himself. During his statement to the court, his allocation, they called it, he talked for 30 minutes, and by talked, I mean rambled. He quoted the Bible, he thanked his lawyers, jailers, friends, and family before paying tribute to the law enforcement officers who finally caught him. He said, "I hope someday God will accept me. The dark side was there, but now I think the light is beginning to shine. People will say I'm not a Christian, but I believe I am. I know the victims' families will never be able to forgive me. I hope somewhere deep down that will happen." Dennis also took full responsibility for his actions and emphasized how cooperative he had been with officials, which is a statement that was disputed by the prosecutor immediately afterward. On August 19th, he was moved to the El Dorado Correctional Facility. He is still at that facility. He has had 3 violations, 2 male violations, and 1 violation of published orders. His early possible release is listed at 2,180. He is listed at 78 years old currently. So, he gave his first prison interview in February of 2019 by writing a letter to the Daily Mail. This was probably inspired by the fact that his daughter published a book in January of 2019 about being the daughter of a serial killer and sort of overcoming that. Much like his allocation, this was a long, rambling letter basically saying he was treated very well in prison. He called himself the prison pet. He spent all of his time in his cell. He was allowed access to TV and other media in 2006 after good behavior. So he wrote that he spends a lot of time watching old movies and reading books that people bring him. Dennis claimed to Daily Mail that he had been possessed by 2 demons called Batter and Factor X when he committed those terrible crimes. He said, "I blame Batter. He or it became the physical scapegoat, sort of a metaphoric frog-looking dragon. I liked frogs and collect figurines at home, probably childhood days fishing at my grandparents' farm pond and big bull frogs at the pond." Then said, "Actually, the real demon is what I call Factor X. I have now figured it out. I know why I do these dark deeds. It is no more a mystery to me. So in a way, yes, Batter or Factor X did make me the way I was as I committed those terrible crimes." For some reason, he called Trump the worst president ever and that we should impeach him. He also wrote of his ailments. He said he had a stroke that affected his handwriting and short-term memory. He also had scoliosis that was getting bad because of his lack of exercise, and he may have had a bedbug infestation. He then spoke lovingly about his daughter and how everyone should read her book. He also wrote of his almost 11th victim, who people assume is Mary Capps. She worked with him and said the year before he was arrested, he had been acting weird, and she had been being harassed by someone. Someone would constantly call her phone and not say anything and just breathe. Someone would constantly unscrew her porch light so there would be no light when she got home. And all of that stopped when Dennis Rader was arrested. In his letter to Daily Mail, he wrote, "There was an 11th victim chosen, but it hadn't worked out that day. I'm sure if I had not been arrested, she would eventually have been number 11. He said she was to become my retirement victim from the SK world, serial killer world. I was getting too old and wanted to back off and still remain BTK. Unsolved cases for who I was, a Wichita mystery. In August of 2023, it was announced that they thought he was linked to 2 unsolved cases after they did a search of the lot where his house used to be. The house is no longer there. They tore it down. In a news release, the Osage County Sheriff's Office said the search was closely tied to the disappearance of Cynthia Kinney, who was reported missing from her Oklahoma home in 1976, and that Dennis was the prime suspect. That had something to do with the trophies they had found buried at the lot that they thought were related to Cynthia. They didn't release a ton of information on what they found. They wanted to sort of keep it under wraps, so I don't know what trophies led them to Cynthia, if it was actually in items of hers. She did work at a laundromat, though, and apparently Dennis had expressed a desire to take someone from a laundromat for some reason. Dennis was also the prime suspect in the death of 22-year-old Shauna Beth Garber, whose body was found in McDonald County, Missouri in December of 1990. The AP reported an autopsy revealed that she had been raped, strangled, and hogtied with 6 different types of cords about 2 months before her body was found. Authorities announced that Dennis was the prime suspect in Shauna's murder due to photographic evidence found in one of his journals that tied him to the crime scene. Dennis denied involvement, but investigators said he could be denying these because the Oklahoma murder could put the death penalty back on the table, because they had the death penalty there when that murder took place. So if you're thinking, like, why wouldn't he just confess to it? It seems like he likes the attention. These particular murders in Oklahoma would allow him to be retried and get the death penalty. Also, Dennis's daughter returned to the area to help in this investigation in any way she could because she really wanted those families to have closure. So she's, like, at her old home, tearing up the lot, looking for evidence to help find any other victims of her father, which I think is great. I think it's amazing that I'm sure it was very conflicting for her, but very helpful. Another possible victim was located in September of 2023. So Dennis had a few drawings of victims in color, not very many at all. This particular one was a blonde girl in a green dress in a barn. And based on tips received, they believe they possibly identified the girl in the drawing. Again, they were very hush-hush about the details. They then said he had a few other drawings in color, and they were looking into all of those to see if they could be identified as possible victims. And that is the BTK killer. It sounds redundant to say because the K in BTK stands for kill, but the BTK strangler, whatever the fuck else you want to be called, the ghost, whatever. So, yeah, that was Dennis Rader, who was borderline obsessed with serial killers and was also a psychopath himself who murdered at least 10 people. I think it's safe to say the ones that they were looking into at the end, those last 3, he probably did, and I think there are many more out there. And I hope that you enjoyed that. That was like one of the first ones I put on my list when me and Taryn started doing it. So I hope I did it justice. I hope you learned something. If you hadn't heard of that before, I'm sure all of you have heard of that before. He's like one of the most famous serial killers of all time. Unfortunately, which sucks because that's exactly what he wanted, but whatever. And I will see you Wednesday and Monday, hopefully. Like I said in the last episode, I hope I'm getting these Monday episodes out for you because those are very hard for me to research. It's just hard to find a case that is like the perfect length. Because now I don't have, like, Taryn for banter, so what used to work is, like, extremely short now, which is why some of them are so short, because I'm still used to, like, 3 or 4 pages being perfectly fine, but now I have to get to, like, 5 or 6, and then at that point, if you're getting 5 or 6 pages long, it's so hard for me not to just get all of the information and make it a full case. So if you have any cases that you think would make good short cases, please suggest them to me, because that is my main struggle. And I hope you have an amazing rest of your week and weekend. And I will see you Monday if you're a subscriber. And if you're not, I will see you Wednesday. And I'm going to record the last pre-recorded episode this morning. And then hopefully I will have my voice back. I will be healed. I will be doing great. And we'll be hanging out again. All right. Have a great weekend. Bye.